October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and in this video I want to tell you a story about my patient. I call her Miss B, and she didn't make it, but she has a story that I want to tell. So stick around and let's talk about Miss B. I worked in an in-home care setting off and on for several years. I got my CNA license in high school, and I worked in long-term care then in a facility setting, and later on I did home care, and that's when I met Miss B. She was way up in her 70s. I forget when this was. This happened, it was like 2013. And her husband was a retired football coach that we all called Coach. He was actually my uncle's football coach. And they were adorable. Like, he worshiped her. He doted on her up until her very last breath, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And whenever I came in to the home, when I first hired in with this particular service, and she was walking, like, she was ambulatory. She used a walker, and that was part of my responsibilities. I was in the evening shift, so I would have her up walking around every evening. And she had this little pedal thing, you know, that you put your feet on, you like little pedals, and that was in front of the patio doors. And it was her favorite thing. She would sit in her wheelchair there. We would push her up to the door, and she would do her pedals and watch the birds. There was always like one or two cardinals in this big, I think it was like a weeping cherry bush tree thing. And as soon as she would get there every afternoon, between 4 and 5 o'clock, I would put her in front of this window and this, you know, the sliding doors, and one cardinal or two cardinals would turn into a whole flock. It's like, I started noticing they would wait for her. And the ones that were, I guess, on watch would alert the others, and within 2 or 3 minutes, the whole tree. And then there was like a couple other little bushes around, a bird feed, you know, several feeders, and you know, water trough pond things were there for them, and they would just flock them. But I started noticing there was always one bird that would alert the others, and I thought that was just the most beautiful thing. It was so, it touched me, because I was in a state in my life where it was chaos, and this was something regular and beautiful every day. So I looked forward to it just as much as anybody. And part of my responsibilities was also to see to her bath in her bed. I would bathe her every night and put her in bed. And when you work in this kind of setting, you learn how to pay attention to things. And you notice when something either, you know, I was trained by a retired RN. This was back in the 90s. I was trained to look, to touch, to smell. And if anything was not like it should be, to report that immediately. And I started noticing she already had a mastectomy. About, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before I came into the picture, she had broken her hip. And then after that, they found the cancer, and then the dementia set in. Like, this poor lady had had it rough, but her husband was devoted to her the entire time. And but I started noticing she'd had a mastectomy, and the breast that had been removed, it started out like a pimple, and I didn't think, it was just a little tiny bit of redness, and I didn't think a lot about it at first. And then it started getting bigger, and I noted it in my logs that it was there. I noted bruises, scratches, anything I found. I learned real quick, you better document that. So I'm keeping track of this, and I was there, you know, 5 nights a week, putting her to bed and giving her bath. And the fill-in, you know, she started noticing this too. She didn't see her as often, so it was easier for her to track that progress. So we started keeping an eye on it, and it started growing. And as it grew, she started changing. Like, we expect this to a certain degree with dementia patients. I specialized in dementia care. That was my focus. And like, every patient that I took care of was diagnosed with dementia. So I knew what I was doing, and it was still off. Like, things were just not right. But the worse that her behavior got, then that's while this was growing. It went from something, I mean, no bigger than that. You could have done that in just like a little pink. That's what it started out as. And by the time we finally got coached to take her to the doctor, it was covering this whole side. You could see it spread like a giant puzzle piece with some spider webs. It was black and blue and purple and angry red outline all the way around it, and it hurt her. I'd started noticing that too. Whenever I would wash her, I was as gentle as I could possibly be with this lady, and she would wince, you know, whenever I would raise her arm to wash under. And I started just squeezing the soap over it because she couldn't stand for anything to touch it. And I was very careful with her clothes to make sure there was no irritation, because it was bad, y'all. If you've never seen anything like this, imagine the worst bruise you've ever had, but more. And that's what it looked like. And it was cancer. The cancer was back, and it had started spreading into her brain, and that explained her odd behavior. Like, she wasn't ugly or nothing, but she had stopped eating, and she had always been a good eater. Like, we tried everything to get this lady to eat and take in some calories and nutrients. I was one of the main cooks, and I was a restaurant cook. This was the second thing I did when I got tired of restaurants. I would work in home care, and so I'm a damn good cook. But we couldn't get her interested in the food. And then there were other times, like, she just didn't really know anything. And then we started noticing, it's like she was rubbing her head a lot, like she had a headache and, you know, things like this. And it was the cancer had spread from her breast that had been removed to her brain. She got really bad sick, and they took her to the hospital. We stayed at the hospital with her, and they sent her home because they knew she wasn't going to make it. There was no way she would survive any kind of treatment, and not at this point and in this shape. So they sent her home to pass in peace, and we went home with her. She eventually went to bed. It only took about a week maybe out of the hospital, and she didn't get out of the bed after that. So we stayed in there with her, and her children were coming in. They lived all over the country. She had several children, big family, big house, beautiful house. And the youngest was the farthest away, and it took him the longest to get here. And those were my last days there because I got assigned to another case. But every day she was in that bed, I read to her. She was a teacher. She was a retired teacher, and she had books all over the house. One of them was Wind in the Willows, and it was one of my favorites when I was a kid. So of course I picked it and I read it to her. I got about halfway through the book before I was reassigned, but I noticed when I was reading to her, she was calm. You know, she wasn't exactly conscious, but she was definitely agitated when it was too quiet. And while I was reading, she relaxed. I held her hand and I read to her every day for hours. And I got reassigned about 2 days before she died. But just before that, I think it was my last day there, her youngest son made it home. And I always thought that she was just waiting for him. She was waiting for her youngest. So now, she's in my heart. And I cannot look at a cardinal without thinking about her. And how she held on. just to see her baby. Would you look at this? But I wanted to tell her story. I wanted to tell her story the way I knew it. And I did come in at the end of her life. I don't know a lot about the beginning of her life. She was well loved though. And I'm glad I was able to assist her in her transit. I'm very grateful for the experience. Tell me your stories. Tell me about your aunts, your grandmothers, your mothers, your sisters, your friends, your patients. Drop a comment. Tell me about them. Tell me their story. We should all tell the stories of those that we have lost, and for those that have survived, the ones that were still here, like my Aunt Kay. She's still here. My college roommate is still here to raise her children. They are survivors. If you've made it all the way to this part of the video, you are awesome. You are my people. Keep coming back.